Question number 2. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, this question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he have confidence in his Minister of Immigration? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, yes, because he's hard-working and a conscientious minister.
Supplementary. Order. Supplementary
question.
Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Seriously, is he satisfied with over 1,000 new patients a week? Is he confident that our hospitals are able to cope with the record demands as a result, given that they have had no extra funding? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I should have also added, in the spirit of the Rugby World Cup, the attributes of the Minister of Immigration, his more youthful years when he played for the South Island team, because it's about as relevant as the statement the members just made. Of course there's more money going to health. Go and have a look at the last budget.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
When did immigration to New Zealand begin, and how many people were in New Zealand prior to that time?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I assume it happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Some talk of 600 years, if not more. And at the time when the first people arrived, one assumes there was nobody here, and there's still an awful lot of room left from what I can see.
Supplementary question.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, yes. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
For the benefit of the Leader of the ACT Party, can the Prime Minister advise him that an immigrant is someone living legally in a country not of his or her birth?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, I think that's true of everybody when they came here at some point.
You don't get it. For those,
supplementary
Speaker,
question,
for those,
Honourable Winston Peters.
For those shallow people who argue...
Order, just, if we can just have the supplementary question.
For those shallow people who argue that everybody is an immigrant, how can he be satisfied that funding levels for our hospitals, schools, police, transport infrastructure and housing is adequate to meet the demands of a population increase driven by record migration? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it's true that if one looks in the last 12 months, the net migration numbers are much higher than they have been in recent years, but over half of that actually reflects either New Zealanders not leaving or New Zealanders returning. And Mr. Speaker, if we look at migrants, they add a lot to our country. They add a lot to the diversity of our political system. Mr. Speaker, the member is, as he knows, the member for Northland. He just needs to wander around his own electorate and look at some of the investment that's come in from the United States and all of that sort of things. And if that doesn't satisfy him that migration makes sense, maybe he just wants to look at his own caucus member, who I think is of Indian descent and I assume not born in New Zealand.
Point of order.
Point of order, the Right
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is well off the subject, which was...
Order. Member will resume his seat. I think on this case there's a slight truth to what the member is saying, and the answer went on for too long. I rose as the member rose to make sure the answer didn't continue any longer. Does the member have a further supplementary? Order. Question.
Mine was a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I've dealt
It's not for the duration of the answer.
Order.
It was the content of it.
Order. I've dealt with the matter. The member may not be satisfied, but I've dealt with it. Question number 3, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.